Hi, everybody. So we have a question today. Are the low FODMAP and the low histamine diet compatible? So that's what we're going to be addressing today. So if you haven't heard of the low FODMAP diet, it stands for fructooligosaccharides, disaccharides, and polyols. And what that all means is that you are avoiding these foods that have fructans or that have polyols or other sugar alcohols. You're avoiding these classes of foods or foods that have these compounds in them because you're trying to probably have better digestion. You're likely experiencing some digestive discomfort, and that's because of bacteria and what they do with those foods. They break those foods down, and feeding those bacteria can cause some discomfort if you get a little bit too much of what they like to make as a byproduct, which generally means that they're fermenting these types of carbohydrates into gases, and that makes you feel pretty uncomfortable. Now, the thing about it is, fermentable carbohydrates, like the FODMAPs, they often are found in really healthy foods. But what it really means is that you're having a carbohydrate malabsorption. In other words, you're not digesting your carbs before the bacteria in your gut are. And that means they're jumping the gun on you. Normally, our bodies get a chance to digest our foods a bit, and then bacteria are supposed to be a lot more well grown and robust further down the digestive tract in the colon, where then they take over. So we're supposed to do a lot more digesting in the small intestine, and then they help us later. But if this is reversed in your digestive tract, or if some of the bacteria that normally inhabit the colon, the large intestine, have moved their way up into the cecum, jejunum, the ileum, is where they're quite problematic, because this is right after the stomach. So if they're in the duodenum or the duodenum, which is right after the stomach, this is an area where we break food down and absorb our nutrients. And if you have an overgrowth of bacteria in that area, you can be pretty uncomfortable. So how does this relate back to FODMAPs, and how does that relate back to histamine? So a diet in foods of one type versus another will feed one type of bacteria versus another. So some people think that by manipulating the types of foods that they eat, they can manipulate the types of bacteria in their gut and therefore how they feel. And that's true. You can do that. Now, you could combine a low histamine and a low FODMAP diet. Those are compatible. My only caution would be that you don't want to eliminate too many foods for too long. And the longer you don't eat these foods, the more the bacteria that help you digest them are going to diminish. And if you get rid of them entirely, you won't digest these foods very well at all, and you actually might become intolerant to them. And an intolerance is different than a discomfort from digestion. And both of these are different from an IgE or IgA reaction, which is what an allergy is. So I'm not sure if any of this made too much sense yet. I'll try and put it together in a clearer way. So the different types of carbs that you eat can make you feel unwell if you eat too many of them. But it's really because the bacteria in your gut aren't in the place that they should be, in the right balance. So that's really what you want to focus on in that case. So if you notice that taking out FODMAPs makes you feel better, it does give you a bit of an indication of what you want to work on. Changing the balance of bacteria, changing where they're located to some extent, and then improving your own carbohydrate digestion so that your bacteria aren't doing all the digesting for you. Now, that's all FODMAPs. What about histamine? So histamine is much more related to actual allergy, whereas FODMAP is not an actual allergy. Histamine, that is a biogenic amine, And these are made in the body, and they can also be made by bacteria. And histamine is one that works in a lot of different ways in the body. It works as a neurotransmitter. It works to prompt the body to make other things like stomach acid. So it's connected to the way that we feel. It's connected to the way that we digest. And it's also probably what you've heard of with relation to allergy. So some foods can contribute histamine to the diet. They can be histamine rich, but primarily it's the bacteria in our gut or the bacteria on the food changing the amino acids in the food to histamine. That's the biggest source of histamine from food. So some foods have histamine, some foods, the bacteria interacts with the food to give you histamine. And then the third type of histamine issue with food is that some food liberates histamine from where it's being stored in a type of cell that you have called mast cells. So if you have histamine being stored on your mast cells, but you don't eat any histamine liberating foods, it might stay there. Or if you stabilize it with antioxidants, it might stay there. But if you have it being very unstable, or if you eat a lot of histamine releasers, then that is, and I have a cat now, and I used to be allergic to cats, very allergic, and now I can have a kitty. So it's great if you're not allergic, and you can work on these things, because now I don't have to take any type of thing to not react to this wonderful little kitty here. So when it comes to if you already have if you're already prone to allergy, and then you're eating a lot of histamine rich foods, or you're eating a lot of histamine liberating foods, then you're going to feel quite bad. But let's talk a little bit about how these two diets could interact. So histamine is generally going to be found in foods that are fermented, pickled, vinegar containing, aged, dried, anything like that. So if you have something that is fresh, you're probably safe. If you have something that is day old, leftover, aged, fermented, pickled, you get my drift, then it's probably not going to be very good for you. And that includes everything from like dried fish to cured meat to dried fruit to any fermented beverages like wines and beers and things like that. And the other thing about alcohol is that it's also a histamine, it can be histamine liberating to have alcohol. So you don't want to have these histamine liberators and these high histamine foods on board. So you want to stick with fresh foods, and you want to stick with certain, we can get into detail with certain types of foods that also are more problematic than others. In terms of ferments, you might want to think about liquids like soy sauce, kombuchas. You might want to think about foods that are probiotic foods. And so they may be contributing to the gut situation in a way that you don't want. So to cut to the chase, some of the foods that overlap on both, that would be fine on both diets, would be things that you could throw into a stir fry. Fresh meat, fresh poultry, and then you can also add a whole bunch of nice veggies. And there are a whole bunch of wonderful veggies that are low in histamines. And were you stuck? There you go. And so you can definitely have fresh vegetables, like you can have a lot of green vegetables, you can have salads, you can also have potatoes, sweet potatoes. You kind of want to avoid things like nightshades. You would like to avoid things like chocolate. And then some things that are problematic are fish, shellfish, and pork. So fish and shellfish have a lot of histidine, which is an amino acid that bacteria easily convert into histamine. And it's hard to get it fresh enough that that process might not already be underway. And you definitely don't want to eat it if it's cured or if it's day old or leftover. And pork is a histamine liberator, so those are some things to avoid. You can usually eat eggs, and so that's fine. Anything that you see that has preservatives like benzoates, I would stay away from those as well. And there's a lot more that can get into it, but I think this is already a little bit rambly and a little bit complicated. There are other things like there are genetics involved, like how well you break down histamine with enzymes, how well that works. It might be related to your genetics. It might be related to how well your genes are working, the epigenetics, which can be influenced by stress. And all of this is also influenced by hormones. So if you notice that some times of the month are worse than others, estrogen can be something that makes allergies and histamine issues seem worse, whereas testosterone and progesterone can be very calming, and they're one of those stabilizing things for the mast cells. And for allergies, they tend to stabilize mast cells. So I hope that helps, and I hope one day you can also not be allergic so that you can enjoy kitties or fermented foods or whatever it is that you enjoy. Just remember that whenever you're doing an elimination diet of any kind, the goal is not to stay on that forever or to take out more and more foods. The goal is just to use it as a way to test and then reintroduce properly so that you can see what it was that you were most sensitive to, and then to build up a tolerance to that thing, generally by starting with the smallest amount and then slowly incorporating it until you're tolerant to that thing again and you no longer have to avoid it. So I hope that helps. Because all of these are related to gut health, and because the most important thing for gut health is diversity of the microbiome, and because diversity of the microbiome is predicated on having a diverse diet, this is why you don't want to stay on a reduced food diet for an extended period of time. I hope that helps you and that you have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for the question. We really appreciate you asking questions here at Ask Dana. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.